Thank you for watching this second episode of Through My Eyes, a survivor's journey through domestic violence series, brought to you by the Needham's Domestic Violence Action Committee. I'm Roxanne Taylor, host for this series and a past member of Needham's DVAC. Joining us today is Deb Jacob, Needham resident, member of Needham's Domestic Violence Action Committee, and volunteer at Reach Beyond Domestic Violence. And we have returning from our first episode, Ms. Sydney Carter, the Community Engagement Specialist from Reach Beyond Domestic Violence. Sydney, would you please introduce our guest today?
Yes. Thank you so much, Roxanne, for the introductions. Today we are here with Brittney, who is going to talk to us a little bit about her experiences and her journey as a survivor. And Brittney is a part of a wonderful program we have over at Reach called Survivor Speakers Bureau. This is a group of folks that come together, we meet monthly, and we work on our writing and sharing our experience.
Thank you all for participating in today's episode. We are here to talk about how trauma and domestic violence overlap. Understanding trauma is the foundation of understanding DV. In our first episode, we defined domestic violence as a pattern of behavior that one person uses to gain and maintain power and control over another person. Sydney, can you remind us of what areas of a person's life this may impact?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Domestic violence impacts people holistically in every aspect of their life. We know that there is financial abuse, emotional abuse, there's abuse using technology, psychological abuse, physical abuse, and sexual abuse. All of these forms of abuse are used to take control over another person, making it hard for folks to seek the support they need, and folks may feel isolated in their experiences.
And we know that trauma is a profound and meaningful loss of control over an experience. It can be complex. It is complex. It can be difficult for us to understand, although most of us have experienced it at some particular level. That's why I'm really grateful to you, Brittney, for being here to talk about your experience and how trauma has affected you as a survivor.
Thank you for having me.
Brittney, thank you for being with us here today. Can you, if possible, share a experience that you had, a traumatic experience that you have had in a past relationship?
Sure. During my experience with domestic violence, I experienced multiple traumatic events in a short period of time. One of them that sticks out most to me was when my son was around 2 weeks old. And at that point, I had transitioned down into the basement just because feeding him and his crying would irritate my ex-husband. So that place really became my safety place. I didn't really know it at the time, but there was one night where my son was crying. I just couldn't get him, I couldn't soothe him to calm down. And I just remember feeling like he's gonna come down here, he's gonna come down here. And he ended up coming down there. And when he did, he ripped my son out of my arms, threw him down in the pack and play, and then threw me against the wall, telling me that he was just screaming in my face, saying, every time he's with you, all he does is cry, all he does is cry. And those words really stuck with me throughout the experience. And then I ended up maneuvering and getting out of the way, but he continued to chase me. And we lived in a home that had split level stairs, so he ended up being able to corner me between the stairs. And he just got in my face again. He was spitting on me, he was screaming. And I just remember my son crying, and it was the most helpless feeling. And I ended up being able to get away, but it was the only way to get out of the situation was to go up the stairs and not back down the stairs where my son was. So I ended up going upstairs, going into the guest bedroom and just shutting the door. And I just remember telling my son, you have to go back down there. But I didn't know if I went back down there, if it would just escalate more. I really just I literally just started praying that my son would be safe and nothing would happen and it's going to be okay. And so that is one memory that really sticks out to me in my experience.
So, Brittney, thank you again for sharing that experience with us here. How do you feel like this affects you now?
It affects me every day. It's almost like if you took like a hamster and it's just on the wheel, I think is the best way I can describe my own PTSD. There are vivid flashbacks for a long period of time after getting out of the situation into safety. Even just being out shopping, and if I'd hear a baby start crying, I would just go straight into panic mode because I just felt like something bad's gonna happen, something's bad, because I couldn't control it prior to that. So that affected me for a while. And then also just having nightmares. I had those for a very long time. And just overall, I mean, it's something that just affects my life every day. And it's just continuing to work through those triggers and those situations.
So you said you think about it every day. Do you still have the nightmares as frequently?
Not as frequently. I've been out of the situation for 4 years now, but there are times when, weeks where just even seeing the truck he used to drive, like just different triggers that can set those off. And it's not necessarily like I'm thinking about it before I go to bed or something, but it's just, I don't know, it's how your mind works when you've experienced so much trauma. But yeah, it's definitely still something I struggle with.
Brittney, thank you for sharing that. I think that, especially as you're talking about these triggers, that you see a truck, it's not his truck, but you see a truck and it triggers you into something. I think that helps us to understand that we don't understand what those triggers are and how profound they are for you. So you're with somebody and they see something that we think of as really innocuous, but it really brings you back and you have this significant reaction to it. And we're sitting here and going, I don't get it.
Yeah.
I think that's an important thing to share.
I think one of the things that's important to acknowledge, right? Deb talked again about that complexity piece, is when we're in the face of trauma, when we're experiencing something, our thinking brain turns off and our survival brain turns on. So we are out of control of our bodies, and our body's just doing what it can to protect us in that moment, right? We often hear about the idea of fighting back. We hear about the idea of flight, leaving the situation. We also hear that idea of freezing, right? That feeling like it's a real out-of-body experience where we can't control what's happening. Oftentimes when we are in these trauma responses, or before we actually experience the trauma, we have this idea that we think we're going to respond a certain way, and then we experience it ourselves, and that's not necessarily how we respond. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that when we're experiencing trauma and we're in the face of trauma, our bodies is taking control when we are not thinking the way that we would usually think. We're just doing what we can to survive in the moment.
Brittney, I can imagine, again, you coming here and speaking to us about it, but how is it generally for you to talk about, these events?
I think I've definitely done the work in being able to talk about the events that I've experienced, but for a long time I did self-isolate. And I just feel like sometimes it's like when you're, I don't know, walking through the airport and you have this luggage with you. Like I just feel like sometimes these traumatic experiences just feel like so much baggage to put on other people that I think people in a similar situation as I was and as I am tend to keep it to themselves and self-isolate because we don't want to put it on other people. But I just, I don't
Yeah, I think it takes a lot of strength and healing, and it's a long journey for folks to be able to talk about their experiences. So again, thanking you, Brittney, for being able to come in front of cameras and come in front of some folks you might not know, and sharing your experiences. I think that when folks in the community hear about survivor stories, there might be things that resonate with them, and can help them acknowledge situations that they've been through or that they've seen folks through. So thank you again.
So, we know that isolation comes hand in hand with domestic violence. And I think it's interesting you were mentioning that not only during, when you were still in the relationship, you experienced isolation, but even afterwards. Can you tell me how that's affected you today and affected relationships?
It's affected my whole world. I mean, I've lost friends over my own traumatic experiences because they don't understand. They have said things like, that could never be me in that relationship, or why didn't you just leave? That's a big one. But when you're in the relationship, what typically happens is you're isolated from your friends, your family. And in my particular situation, I was in a different state, so I didn't have anyone that I could go to was for him and his parents or his brothers and stuff like that. But now it affects me differently because I self-isolate, because I feel that sometimes my story can be too much for people. And I think that I tend to shy away from certain conversations or certain social situations just based on, for me, it feels that people know, but they don't know the full effects it has on me. So I tend to shy away, like there's this elephant in the room. And that is really difficult to navigate. Also, it affected my short-term memory, which is really difficult when you're working, because I have to write everything down now just based on what the trauma has done to my own brain. And so it makes it difficult, definitely.
So what do you think is important for people to know about traumatic impacts from domestic violence?
I think that it affected me directly, but it also impacted my family, my friends, my work, my social life. It impacted, so when you think about trauma and domestic violence as a whole, it can happen to your neighbor, and that can affect your community, or it essentially affects everything.
Yeah, I think oftentimes when we are in the community and we're talking about domestic violence with folks, there is that myth that domestic violence only impacts the person or the survivor in the instance. We know from the work that we do and the folks that we talk to that it is affecting all aspects of somebody's lives and the people beyond that. I know that if one of my coworkers is experiencing something and they're not able to perform to the same amount of level that they used to be, that it's going to impact my workload, right? I know that if my roommate is going through something and they're not able to pick up the bills that we usually split or make it to the grocery store, that it's going to directly impact how I'm showing up into certain spaces. Even though we might not know that somebody's experiencing the domestic violence themselves, we're all facing the impacts of what's happening in between folks' relationships.
And what do you feel has helped you along, this journey of healing?
I have really, I think oftentimes we tend to put up our guards, but I really had to just take that down and just surrender to the healing experience. And my support group at Reach was really my number one. And for months, we'd meet every week, but and it was during COVID, so we were all on Zoom, and during that time I would just have to turn the camera off because I just couldn't even make it through listening to other people's experiences while also validating my own. But I think that was really important for me, was my support group, because I didn't feel as that I was alone anymore. That I had people that understood the effects that this has on your life and how it impacts everything. So I had to really just dig deep and just peel away the layers and do the work that was necessary.
And Brittney, what do you see for the future for yourself and your son?
I mean, I hope one day that I get a second chance. I oftentimes feel that I was robbed of a family based on somebody else's actions. And I love love, so I just hoping that I find somebody and who understands. I think that's important because also your healing journey is not linear, so it's going to be an up and down road, and I just hope that I find somebody that's willing to take those steps with me.
I think when we're thinking about healing, it's really important to acknowledge that in order to make those first steps, we really need to feel our feelings. And I think also when we're thinking about, right, Brittney's journey and other folks' journey, no one journey is going to look the same. Healing is all over the place. Some days we might have really, really great days where we're like, we can take on the world. And then the next day it could be back to a space where we're like, you know what, like I don't want to get out of bed today. And that's totally okay. The way that we heal, the way that we are on our journey is all different, right? As Deb talked about earlier, everybody experiences trauma differently. So when we're working with survivors and we're talking to survivors, we might see a lot of overlap of, oh, I've heard that type of abuse happen to somebody else, but it didn't impact them the same way it's impacting you. When we're thinking about trauma, the impacts can be vastly different depending on many different things, including things like identity. Brittney talked about location, and just where we are in our journey of life in general.
Brittney, thank you for sharing your strength and your experience with us, and providing us with some hope for other DV survivors and their family and friends. I hope our audience will join us for our next episode of Through My Eyes, a survivor's journey through domestic violence, where the discussion will center around the involvement of the police and the court system.